Hello and welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Nicole and today I'm going to be going over what I read in the month of March. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the last couple of books I finished in the month of March, and I will do a short book review of those. I'm going to talk about my stats, so just how my reading in general went in March, and I'm also going to be talking about some reading challenges that I'm participating in, give you an update on that. I will include at some point who the winner of my April TBR is. So every month or so, I allow viewers to pick a book for me to read, and one got selected in the month of April, so I will share what that book is. And yeah, there's a variety of different things I'm going to talk about. So if you would like to skip around in the video or skip a section or that kind of thing, I will put chapter titles on the screen so you can skip ahead, and there will also be timestamps in the description box below so you can use those to skip forward and backwards or whatever as you choose. For those of you who are here for the whole thing, grab a drink or something, let's settle in and let's talk about how my March reading went. So to start, I'm going to talk about two books that I finished towards the end of March, and the first one was Catcher in the Rye. This is by JD Salinger. This was a reread for me. I read this book in high school, like a lot of American students would have during the 80s and 90s, and this was my least favorite book I read in high school. I could not stand this book, and it has continued on in history as like the worst book I've ever read, or at least the one that I liked the least. And yeah, I recall having very strong feelings about this book in high school and really not liking the protagonist, Holden Caulfield. So, what is this book about, and how do I feel about it now? Well, let me share. The Catcher in the Rye is a first person narration by a young man named Holden Caulfield. He is at the beginning of the book struggling and has had a major struggle and a crazy event happen in life in the winter of the prior year that he's sharing this in. We never really find out who he's talking to, but whoever he is addressing, he ends up sharing everything that happened into his life in the last year that led up to this moment where he is now telling, let's just call them his audience, his story and his saga and the drama that happened to him that led to his downfall, if you will. And Holden is a rather privileged young man who attends a very wealthy high school. It's been one of many private schools that he has been put into. And at the beginning of the story, we have found that he has been kicked out of school, and we hear about what happens to him over the course of just a few days in his life as he traverses about New York City in trying to avoid going back home. What were some of the highs in this book? I'd have to say at the end of the day, it's probably the point of view. Um, Holden Caulfield as narrator has a very, very strong narrative voice. You very much get a good sense of who he is as a person, how he talks, his cadence, all of that is really well written. And I have to say, as a piece of literature, this is actually a pretty good book. Now, how you as a reader will respond to it, it really depends. But I can say from mentioning to my viewers and mentioning this on live streams, there are a lot of people who have very strong negative feelings about Holden Caulfield as a character himself. And I think that honestly, quite frequently overwhelms the entire rest of the book. This book covers a variety of different topics, certainly adolescence. It talks about Holden Caulfield's own psyche and way of thinking. It definitely could be a good introduction to an unreliable narrator. There are discussions and looks at the complexity of a person's interior life, trauma that can be experienced in adolescence, as well as just the difficulty of transitioning to going from innocence and youth to an older young adult, really, is what it is. And at the end of the day, I would say this book is primarily a character study, which gets me into the lows of the book, honestly, because the biggest low in this book is just the narrator and the characterization and Holden Caulfield himself. He is a character that will just grate on your nerves in a lot of ways. He is very, very difficult to like. He himself confesses to basically being a chronic liar, an exaggerator. He just has sort of an irritating way of speaking. He kind of sort of not really swears a lot. He is constantly talking about how miserable everything is, how miserable his life is, how much everyone around him is a phony. Probably phony is one of the most frequently used words in this book, as it's part of just his speaking pattern, which again is very strongly put forth, but may not be something you like. And I have to say that the reason Holden Caulfield's characterization is such a low for me is because Holden's story and his situation and his life and what's going on in it has some pretty sad and extremely traumatic things involved in it. But you only hear about those things very quickly in passing, which kind of fits into the psychological space that Holden Caulfield is in. However, he as a character just elicits so little sympathy in the reader that you seriously struggle to relate to him in any way whatsoever or have any sympathy or empathy towards him. And I really hate to say that, but it's just the way that the story is told. I don't really think works well for JD Salinger's intent. From everything that I could read and find real briefly in searching for it, Salinger's intent in writing this novel, one, was for adults, not high school students. So I feel like more teachers need to keep that in mind. But his intent was for his readers to understand the struggle that Holden Caulfield was in trying to navigate moving from a life and experience of innocence into a more mature adult like state. So while he is using a high schooler to talk about sort of a loss of innocence, he didn't necessarily mean the focus to be on the high school aspect of it. However, what I found is if you mention this book to most people, they will say two things about it. One, they couldn't stand Holden Caulfield, and two, they found him to be one of the most unlikable, whiny, privileged high school characters ever created. In fact, I rarely hear anybody mention the trauma that Holden Caulfield has gone through. And there were at least three things that stood out to me in rereading this book as being really horrible things for any person to experience. And yet, despite that, I still struggled to like Holden as a character. And I found it interesting that the couple of people I mentioned these traumatic events to, none of them remembered that as being part of the story, which again makes me think that JD Salinger kind of overwrote Holden Caulfield as this teenage narration to the point where his intent in writing this book was lost. And for that reason, this book only got 3 stars from me. I didn't hate it this time, but I really didn't like it still. Um, I just can't get over my dislike of Holden Caulfield. There were times where I felt like maybe he was a sociopath or a psychopath. I still kind of wonder that about his character. And I think some of what's going on with this book now is that it's hard to read this book knowing what we know today in popular culture about psychology and neurodivergence and just everything in those fields of how people think and socialize and work. I don't think lines up with how this character was written. I think this character, understandably, was very much written with the understanding of psychology and people that existed at the time. So it could very well be that back in Salinger's time, Holden Caulfield would be a character that would elicit more sympathy. But I think even by the time you got into the 80s and 90s, that time had passed, which I think is why this book doesn't sit well with a lot of people. But yeah, I don't know. This book is something that I guess I would recommend to people who like character studies, especially people who are not your typical likable character. If you have to like the main character in your book, do not read this book. Just ignore it. It's not how you should read it. It's not how you could read it. Just skip it altogether. But if you like books that feature a very dominant, unlikable character, one that may be a bit crazed or certainly has enough issues that you're wondering if it's you or them. I'm thinking of a book like The Wasp Factory. I feel like those two characters could be friends, and that would be super creepy and crazy. Anyway, yeah, if you like that kind of thing, you don't mind a slow paced book where you are just crawling through a city with your main character, we'd catch her in the rye. Okay, so after that, I fortunately read a different book that also featured one main character and we followed him through his life, but fortunately, I really enjoyed this character. And that book that I read is Body and Soul by Frank Conroy, and this is about a young boy named Claude who is growing up in the tenements in the early 1900s, 1940s in New York City. So basically, same time period, a little bit earlier than Holden Caulfield, totally different person. And Claude is a young boy, like I said, who's growing up being raised by his mom, who is single and is a taxi driver and is just trying to make ends meet and is really struggling. We start with Claude when he is about 3 or 4, and we follow him through his life as he comes to understand that he is basically kind of a child prodigy on the piano on the cover. And we go with Claude as he develops himself, as he grows up, and as his love for music and understanding of his gift and ability grows. This is a really close study of what it is like to be somebody who is truly a master in their field. This book covers a variety of topics, but mainly focuses on music, especially the piano, as well as some ideas of composition. And it definitely covers this idea of, like I said, a child prodigy or the making of a master in a field of music. And it's also about, the making of a man, and it discusses class as well as just the opportunities that would be available to somebody that could either move them forward in their musical experience or hold them back. These are all topics that I find really fascinating about people who are considered geniuses or prodigies or just, excel in whatever field it is that they're doing. I even like nonfiction on this topic. Like I'm thinking about things like Outlier, which just looks at people who just go well beyond the norm in their field of specialty. In this case, it happens to be music, which is an area I'm always interested in, both music and art. So, yeah, I really enjoyed this book. Some of the highs in this book for me definitely had to do with the characters and the relationships the characters had with and to one another. So, Claude himself, I thought was really well drawn. He was a really respectable young man, yet very complex at the same time. You definitely got to experience his struggles with loneliness due to the way he was being brought up and kind of neglected, honestly, at the beginning of the book. And you also just got to see him develop his own dedication to his craft. I really enjoyed him. I also liked all the characters of the different teachers that he had to work with, and it was just a really warm read through most of the book. There were just some lovely characters in here. Everybody was really just looking out for the best for him and his welfare. This was not like a dance mom type of situation where he was being pressured to do things he did not enjoy. And I liked that. I think after Catcher in the Rye, I just needed some happy, good vibes, and that's what this book gave me. I will say there were some lows in this book. One of them had to do with the plot. I felt like the pacing at times didn't feel too slow as I read, but it felt like it was too slow for the length that this novel was going to be. There were certain times of Frank's life that I felt like for this to just be 460 pages, we got too much of one particular year in Frank's life and not enough of others. And then it felt forced. It felt like there were forced time jumps just to include more of his life. As you got towards the end of the book, there was a lot of very heavy foreshadowing or just parenthetical phrases that told you what was going to happen later in Claude's life. And I think it's because the author started to realize he was, running out of space to tell this story, and he wasn't going to be able to show you that happened later in Frank's life. And I think that had to do with sort of the pacing choices and the focus that he gave on some earlier parts of Claude's life. So that was kind of a downer for me. I wish that we had maybe gotten less of certain parts of his life so we could have seen more of the fallout or changes as he got into maybe his 50s or something like that, because it felt like that's what Frank Conroy wanted to do, was to give us an idea of how Frank would go into his 50s, but for some reason he just couldn't write that in. And I don't think I would have wanted the book to be longer for that, but it was just frustrating. The other thing I didn't like towards the end of the book were there were a couple of like twists or reveals at the end of the book that I didn't feel like were necessary and almost ruined the book for me towards the end. So, all that said, I still ended up giving this book a 4 stars. I thought it was a really good read. I would recommend this to anyone who just wants sort of a heartwarming story where virtually everything works out, which could be a pro or con depending on how you feel about that kind of thing, and where people just work together for the success of someone, to see someone just reach their full potential who maybe may not have had the opportunity to do so. It is a book about music. It is a book about passion. It is a book that discusses and goes over sort of a bit of a rags to riches story, if you will. And I did find it really inspiring and motivating. And so, yeah, if I had to choose a coming of age story to recommend for this month, this would be the book. Okay, so that covers the 2 books that I finished before the end of March. So let's go and look at some stats for the month of March as a whole. So here is my summary of the month, and there's a couple of things that stood out to me this month. One, I think this is the first time in a while that I've had no 5-star reads. So I did not have a single 5-star read this month, which I thought was interesting. But I did have a pretty decent average star rating. It's 3.96, which I think is around where my star ratings normally are. And we'll get into why that may have happened in just a second. The other thing that really stood out to me on this graphic was my page count total. I was 80 pages away from 5,000 pages this month. Now, I never pay attention to how many pages I'm reading as the month goes on, nor the number of books, but I'm pretty sure if I had have known that I was 80 pages away, I would have done something. I would have read 80 more pages in one of the 2 books that I DNF'd. Maybe. Anyway, yeah, that's how that worked. Sorry, I temporarily had to step away, so now I'm trying to remember what I was saying at the end. I don't remember, so we're just gonna move on. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is just my overall star ratings for the month, and here is a graphic of everything that I read and finished in the month of March. I can say at least one of these books, that being Don Quixote, I actually started in February, but this is showing everything I finished in March and what I rated it. And the thing that stood out to me here was it made sense that I had a decently high average rating for the month, despite the fact I had no 5 stars. And the reason I say that is because I did notice that I had a lot of 4 and 4.5 stars this month. And I was pretty happy with that. In fact, interestingly enough, I noticed that the only 3-star reads I had this month were the 3 books that weren't books that I chose off my shelf. Other than that, I feel like I picked some pretty good books off my shelf. Now, I will say that Liars is another book that I did not own. I got it out of the library. Also read it for the Carol Shields Prize. Came out with a better result on that one. And the final thing that we'll look at for my March reading is just all the books that I read and worked on in the month of March. So you can see all the books that I read and finished. They have star ratings. You can see the 2 books that I DNF'd. And you can also see the 3 books that I am currently still reading. And I don't think I really have any comments on those, but that's everything that I worked on this month that helped me get almost to 5,000 pages. And I should mention that those 5,000 pages do include the 100 or 200 some odd pages I read in the 2 books that I DNF'd. And it does also include the pages that I read in the books I haven't finished yet. So that is the most accurate reflection of everything that I read. Whereas the 13 book number is just the 13 books that I finished. It's not the full number of books that I was working on this month. Okay, so that's all my March stats. Let's talk about what's going on in April. I have already posted my April TBR video, so you can go check that out if you're interested in finding out what I'm reading in April. And I do want to mention now what the winner is of the viewer pick for April. So if you watch that video, you will see that I gave viewers an opportunity to vote for what book I would read off of my P shelf, if you will. So my bookshelves are organized by title, and this month the letter picked for viewers to pick off of was the letter P. I showed every book that I own whose title starts with the letter P as of the date that I filmed. And let's talk about who the winners are. Or winner is. There's just one winner. I took some time going through all the comments that were left. Thank you for everybody who voted. And I should mention a couple of things. If you voted for a book and it did not get picked, that book is going to be added to my unicorn jar and may come up in some future month. I do this partially just to encourage everybody to vote for a book, even if you don't think it's going to win. I have read at least 4 or 5 other books that have been voted on just because they've come out of my unicorn jar. So there is always that opportunity for me to still read your book. Now, let's get to the books that people did vote on. There are a couple of honorable mentions. I was surprised by the number of votes that Priory of the Orange Tree got. Normally, the comments that I get is, oh, I chose the shortest book because your TBR is so long. That's very kind of you guys to think of that, but I like reading long books. And Priory of the Orange Tree actually came really close to winning. It had at least 8 or 9 people vote for it. So it was definitely on the higher end. At one point, I really thought that was going to be the winner. Um, Hey guys, I never do this in my videos, but it's editing Nicole here. And yeah, I'm coming in because mistakes were made. Counting mistakes were made. Things got weird. There were so many votes, and some of you like did a lot of talking in your comments and stuff. I've counted and recounted and recounted, and I realized two things. One, there was a book on that list that definitely did not start with the letter P. Nobody voted on it, so it was fine. You can see if you can figure out which book it was. And then two, I actually, when I made this video, counted incorrectly. I thought there was a clear winner by one vote. I was wrong. I went back and I looked again. There was a tie, but with 12 votes each, at least when I counted, was Pachinko and The Princess Bride. And so I couldn't figure out what to do. So I ended up posting a video to my members because if you don't know, I've started channel memberships. I think I mentioned that at the end of this video. But anyway, I posted a video to my members and I polled them and asked them to choose the winner. So I will put up on the screen now who the winner of the poll is. I don't even know yet. I haven't rechecked it since last night. So we'll be finding out together. So this is who the winner is. Ignore if I say anything else in the video. I will put on the screen the correction each time. I don't know how many times I say the wrong winner. We'll find out. And there's actually still a chance that who I said was the winner in the original video is actually the winner. I guess I should check that before I add this in. Whatever, it's too late. It's filmed. This is going to be crazy. I had to recount the votes multiple times to figure out which one was going to win. And the winner is one vote. So I'm excited to get it on my TBR. I'm really happy about this pick. I would have been happy with either, to be honest, but I think this is going to be a really fun book to read together. So I'm definitely thinking this deserves its own little day-long read-along. So I'm going to look at some dates in May and watch out for that announcement video. That will definitely be happening in the month of April. Did I say May? I don't know what month I'm in. Anyway, that is going to be the April pick. I will be looking on my calendar and figuring out if there's a day that we can do some special sprints and read it together. Okay, now I'm going to move into my updates on the various different reading challenges I'm participating in, and I'm going to start with my bingo board from hell, which has been hell just to update every single month. I don't know why. I can never get the numbers on this thing right. I've come up with the system using some graph paper, wrote down all the books I've read so far this year, and I think it's right. Maybe. No promises. Good thing this is just for fun. All right, let me pull it up for us all, and we will see what is going on my bingo board from hell. So here we go, up on the screen, my bingo board from hell, and there's a couple of things that really stood out this month that I wanted to talk about. So I'm just going to update you on the things that have changed. So one, you can see that I have completed the 5 series. So this was not read 5 different series or that kind of thing. I just wanted to make progress in 5 series and not necessarily 5 different series. I just wanted to read 5 books that were parts of series. And so I did that. I read Parable of the Talents. So that was one series that I actually completed. And then I read 6 books in the Oz series. Now, you're probably wondering why the number in black in that circle isn't 7. And the reason is that I don't know. I think I got confused between this and series on. Yep, that's what the reason is. So, oh, that number should actually be 7. Either way, I've still completed this prompt on my bingo board. Other things to update on this board, my 25 and 2025, I added 2 books to that for a total of 6, and that was from reading Don Quixote and XX this month. Both those books also added 2 to my unfinished book count, so that got moved up to 3. As far as books that I'm afraid of missing out on or fear of missing out on or experiencing FOMO over, I added 4 books to that this month. 2 were for my local book club, Fairy Tale and Hello Molly, and 2 were for my fear of missing out on some good books that were longlisted for the Carol Shields Prize, and that would be Bear and Liars. I also was able to add 1 book as something that I had recently hauled, and that was Catcher in the Rye. And I also have noticed that I'm behind in just a couple of categories. So far, I have read no books that are considered underdogs, which kind of sort of makes sense. And for me, what I'm calling my underdogs are books that are on shelves that were mentioned as being a possible vote for viewer pick, but that nobody voted on. I know, sadness. And I haven't read any of those books yet. I am keeping track of what books they are. There's like 20 of them so far. And then the other category that I'm a little bit behind on is actually viewer picks. So I was hoping to read 1 a month, but because I'm just letting it come up on my TBR game or not, I'm kind of behind on that. So I'm thinking of lowering that number from 12 to maybe like 8 or 10, just to keep it realistic, because I don't want to get to the end of the year and feel like I failed to read the correct number of viewer recommendations when it's just totally random as to whether or not that happens anyway. So that's how my bingo board's looking, and I'm not mad about it. Keep things moving as fast as possible. We are going to now look at my 52 books in 52 weeks. So here is my cover board for that, and I'm just going to quickly go over the books that I added on here in case you are also participating in this challenge and would like some book ideas. So for prompt number 3, which is the title starts with the letter M, I had The Marvelous Wizard of Oz. In fact, the Oz series came in clutch this month for me. For prompt number 14, which was climate fiction, I actually just moved Project Hail Mary there. It was in a different spot, but I decided it was going to work better there for me. For number 24, where the title is a spoiler, I went with Belle Green, where the subtitle is America's Favorite Librarian, because I felt like that kind of spoiled the fact that she's a librarian. I stretched it. That's what I did. I stretched it. Prompt number 27 was features a magician, and for that I went with Ozma of Oz. Prompt number 28 was a crossover set in a shared universe, and that was The Road to Oz, and 29 shares the universe with 28 is obviously Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. 35 was written in the third person, and that is XX that I used for that. Prompt 36 is a final sentence is less than 6 words long, and I used bear. For 38, an adventure story, I decided to use Don Quixote. I couldn't remember whether or not that was already on there. Prompt 42 required there to be a non-human antagonist, and for that I used the Emerald City. Prompt 44 needed to be a book with a celebrity on the cover. Hello Molly was an easy choice for that. Prompt 49 needed to be set in a country with an active volcano, and I used Liars. And prompt number 50 was a book set in the 1940s, and for that I used Catcher in the Rye. So at least it was good for something. I don't want to forget to talk about my year-long reads. One of them is Clarissa. I am working my way through this massive book by reading the letters in the month that they are dated, because this is an epistolary novel. So in the month of March, I read all the March letters to and from Clarissa and her friends and family, and man, was it chaos. And I had 2 takeaways from this month. One, that virtually everyone other than Clarissa and her best friend are the villains in this story. Like, everyone is behaving horribly. My other takeaway is that Clarissa is not as innocent as she would like to think she is. Not so much that she is guilty of what her family thinks she's guilty of, but I don't think her heart is as free as she says it is. At least that's my takeaway from the month of March. Things are definitely ramping up. I'm really interested to see what happens in the month of April. So I am enjoying this book and can't wait to continue. And I'm about this far in, which is almost at page 300. And I've got to say, it's moving along very smoothly. My second year long read is The Year of Wonders. I started this last year in July, and it is just a piece of classical music a day. And they are just dated by the day of the month, which technically means you can start this book whenever, which is what I did. I started in July and then have just wrapped around to the beginning of the year. So this month I finished the songs for the month of March, and I will put up on the screen my favorite song of the month. And in the description box below, you can find links to both the read along that I am hosting on the story graph for Clarissa, as well as the Discord link and the playlists link for Year of Wonder if you would like to join us in talking about our favorite weekly songs and our favorite monthly songs. And I would say I'm pretty sure if you listen to my song of the month that you're probably familiar with it, but all the songs are great. I definitely recommend listening to this one. So that is it. This is all the books that I managed to read or work on in the month of March. And I almost forgot to mention, but March is March of the Mammoths. So let me show you what the mammoths were that I worked on in this month. It was these three. I am not finished with Clarissa. Like I said, this is a year-long read, so I started this in January and I'll be reading it until December. I finished XX, which I had read about 150 pages of last November or something like that, and I read the rest of it this month. And then there was Don Quixote, which I had started in February and just had about 200 pages left to read this month and also finished it. I had much greater plans for March of the Mammoths this month, but got sick at the beginning of March and really didn't feel well for the first 2 weeks of month. That's actually how the Oz series ended up taking over my month. But I am still really happy with all the reading that I did. I had a great time and have no complaints about that. So I do have one final special thing to mention, which is I have started channel memberships. I will at some point do a big announcement about it, but for now I'm just doing a soft rollout. I just put out the first video. I announced it during my reading sprints this past Monday, and I'll be mentioning it at the end of my videos for a while. But if you are interested in reading with me, being part of my book club, hearing more, you can click the join button below. You'll see what the options are available there. I'll also be sure to link my last reading sprint, and you can go and watch the first couple of minutes of that, where I talk in some detail about what the membership is going to involve and what my vision is for that. But it's just going to be a fun way to just get more videos, more reading sprints, more live streams, more information about the books that I've read, because trust me, I go on and on and on about them, and I cut a lot out that you guys don't see, and my members will get more of that. So if you want more of that, join. Otherwise, if you would like to support my channel in some other way, give this video a like, subscribe to my channel for just more content and more books and more fun and more good times and more mammoth reads. And yeah, let me know how your March went, and I'll talk to you next time. Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Nicole. No, that didn't make sense.